All right, hello everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out. This is such a lovely audience. My name is Amali and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. We are so excited to have Mutsuki Mockett and Megha Majumdar with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Marie's newest novel, The Tree Doctor. But before we get started, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First off, we will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Marie will be signing and personalizing books at the alcove next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of The Tree Doctor online using the link in the live stream description. Now, a bit about tonight's book. Contemplative and evocative, The Tree Doctor follows one woman in the midst of the start of the pandemic, locked away in her childhood home in California while her family in Hong Kong awaits her return. The word that largely comes to mind for me when thinking about this novel is liberation. Liberation from the body through pleasure and pain, liberation from the burdens of motherhood and daughterhood, liberations from boring beetles and infected tree branches and beyond. There's so much to discuss in this novel, so let me go ahead and introduce tonight's guests. We have Mutsuki Mockett, who was born to an American father and a Japanese mother. American Harvest, God, Country, and Farming in the Heartland won both the 2021 Northern California Book Award and the Nebraska Book Award, and as a tribute to the complicated and nuanced history of the United States and its people. She lives in San Francisco and teaches at the Bennington Writing Seminars. She's currently a Fulbright Fellow to Japan for 2022-2023. And as I mentioned earlier, Megha Majumdar joins Marie in conversation tonight. Megha is the author of the New York Times bestselling novel A Burning, which was nominated for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Prize, and the American Library Association's Andrew Carnegie Medal. A 2022 Whiting Award winner, she lives in New York and teaches at Princeton University. Okay, that is all for me. Without any further delay, please join me in giving Marie and Megha a very warm welcome.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming out on a cold Thursday. It's nice to be in New York. So I'm going to read you a little section, just a little bit so I don't bore you too much. I'm going to read just a part of a scene actually, where the Tree Doctor first goes to visit our unnamed protagonist. And then we'll have a conversation. Okay. If you have a book, I'm starting on page 59, but you don't have to follow along. While they were sitting a socially distant and respectable 6 feet apart. Do you remember those days? While they were sitting as socially distant and respectable, 6 feet apart, a leaf coasted diagonally down from right to left. It spiraled like the single blade of a helicopter. It must be a maple tree seed, she thought, remembering how her mother had showed her in Japan that such seeds could whirl in the air as they fell. They had collected the leaves and tossed them loosely as they whirled down. The Tree Doctor, seeing that her attention had drifted, scanned the air for what had caught her interest, and also saw the falling leaf. It was small and light, and had not fallen as quickly as most maple seed pods did, and then she realized it could not be a maple tree seed. It was falling from too great a height, and anyway, the maples had not fully leafed yet. The leaf was actually a feather. Behind it, another feather was falling, and as she turned her attention farther to the right, she saw a cloud of soft down wafting in the air. The sun caught all the feathers and shone through them, and she was reminded of the soft down of willow trees of the time as a college student on exchange, when she had gone punting through the soft down of willows in Oxford. But of course, this down could not be from an English willow tree. High up on a branch of the pine tree she called the penthouse, a Cooper's hawk was depulking the carcass of a songbird. His feet gripped the body, and with his beak he was methodically stripping the little bird, who was already decapitated. He had ripped out the wings and the tail. The dead bird's pink feet stuck straight out. There was a gray titmouse sitting on a branch not too far away, and it was screaming. It was neither the fretful sound a titmouse made while eating, nor a sound of warning. It was something else entirely. The titmouse was screaming in agony, and she realized that the dead bird, now being flayed by the hawk, was most likely the titmouse's mate. Another hawk landed beside the first hawk. They squawked to each other, and then the second hawk, slightly smaller, who had been preparing the titmouse for eating, held out the captured prey with his foot, and the other hawk received it and began to strip bits of flesh off the carcass while the titmouse continued his or her lamentation. Every now and then the hawk who was eating paused to rip out some of the feathers, so the air continued to whirl with feathers, which the breeze picked up and scattered far across the garden, all the way from the weeds beneath the penthouse to the iris bed and over to the orchard. And as the titmouse cried, the smaller of the two hawks, whom she would understand was the male, leapt neatly with his hawk legs, and with his wings batting at the air a few times, landed on top of his mate, and they had sex, as she continued eating. With an instinct no engineer could hope to replicate, they balanced there, on her feet, which were gripping both the pine tree and the dead bird, and he sat on her, and flapped his tail up and down, and she hers to receive him, and as she ate the headless bird, the titmouse cried for what was lost. It was only a backyard garden, and he had only come to look at her cherry tree. Gardens were just places where flowers bloomed. She cleared her throat. "Are you sure?" she began. You wouldn't like a piece of cake." Sorry.
I love hearing you read.
Thank you.
What a section to choose.
I remembered it was funny, but it really wasn't very funny. Only at the very end.
I think it was perfect because it has everything. And one of the things that I really love about this book is how like life it is. It has the ecstasy, it has the brutality, it has the selfishness, the sorrow, the joy, all of it. It's so full. And I want to ask you how you began.
How I began writing?
The book.
Well, I was looking at a garden, I guess, and so it was mainly. I mean, it was a very strange experience because I started writing during the pandemic. So, I had a book was supposed to come out in April. Remember, we all started staying at home in March. Some of us in February were already very scared and thought we should stay at home. That was me, and I began to turn my attention to the garden where I was staying, and so although the descriptions come from first-person observation mostly, but the story just sort of unfolded in my head pretty quickly. But I did have some rules. I thought maybe I could write a novel with a very small cast of characters in one location that won't require a lot of research, and then it could finish it quickly. And so I was also very practical about it.
It's interesting to hear you say that you wanted the scope of this novel to be limited, because yes, it is, and it also feels huge. I really want to bring back the word that Amali used, which is liberation, which feels perfect. And I want to ask you about writing this particular woman, who I don't think I read very much in fiction.
Really? Yeah, I thought she should have her own book that people could read. I mean, I guess I had been thinking, well, so many novels I feel, kind of thinking in this grouchy way, there's so many coming of age stories, as though, you're a young person and you come of age and then there you are, you're set. It's all good now. You're on your way. That hasn't been my experience. And I don't actually know. I mean, I know that it's not the experience of my friends who are women of a certain age. I remember my father saying to me, 50's when it just starts to get good. Things start to become clear. And so I was definitely consciously thinking, well, okay, so what would someone in this stage of life be thinking about? someone who they call the sandwich generation. If you're middle-aged and you're caring for small children and caring for older, ailing parents, there's a pressure that gets exerted on you. So what is the emotional experience of somebody dealing with that? And how can I put it in fiction and make it interesting and real and relevant and tell that story? Because I think that story is important. Because I think otherwise you might think, well, okay, I came of age, and then it didn't go the way that the book said it was supposed to. I wasn't like there, you know, and get the guy in the house and then everything's, you know, it doesn't necessarily work that way. So what are the other narratives?
Right, and there's this beautiful selfishness in how she guards her solitude. Can you talk about writing a mother who is so kind of exuberantly, also privately selfish? She's looking out for herself.
Yeah, so she has gone to California to care for her mother. She's left her husband and 2 children in Hong Kong, and the pandemic happens, and she has a lot of difficulty getting back to her family, and the difficulties are real. And I just said in an interview the other day, there was actually, during the pandemic, there was a Chinese family across the street from where I was living, and it was a mother and father and 2 children, and then 2 sets of grandparents who were Chinese, and so I would hear Chinese opera, and I would see the grandparents walking up and down the street for exercise, and I said, are they ever going to go home? I didn't say it like that, but that's basically what I said, and then I was told it's very difficult to go back to China. It's hard to get a flight. It's really expensive. And then even if you get back to China, what if you test positive? Then you have to stay in a hotel, and then you don't know when you're going to get out of the hotel. And I thought, well, that's really complicated and potentially very convenient for the right person. So there's, you know, she's not like a sociopath, but maybe sort of takes advantage of this situation to take some time for herself.
She's also a teacher, and she's teaching the tale of Genji, which I do not know very much about at all. I wonder if you could talk about your interest in that and bringing that into the novel.
That was hard. It's a novel that I've always been in. So if you don't know, the tale of Genji was written circa 1000 AD in Japan. It was written by a woman. Many people say it's the world's first novel, and then they say things like it's the world's first psychological novel, or it's the world, you know, they qualify it so that it's not actually the first novel, but it's a novel, and it was written by a woman. And my mother told me this when I was 14, and this was very exciting. So whenever I had some sort of publishing issue, I'd think, yeah, but Lady Murasaki wrote the first novel 1,000 years ago, and she was a woman. But at a certain point, I realized I don't really know what this novel is about, or I know pieces of it. And so at the start of the pandemic, I thought I should more fully engage with this book. And I think, honestly, Megha, in the early drafts, I did kind of a sloppy job of engaging with the book. I read just enough to be able to convey plot points. And my editor said, I think you have to do a better job with this novel. So then I really engaged with the text, and then found that there was, of course, it's written by a woman who's observing other women in court who are struggling with the same problems that women struggle with today, although, you know, it's a little different, but essentially the same existential questions. And so there was this beautiful process of pulling out little bits of wisdom that get embedded in this novel. And I, you know, my dream was, and I haven't said this publicly, my dream really was to be able to give to people a way to read the tale of Genji through this book. So there are many things in this book, like, you know, the sex scenes, but if you read it, you'll have a taste of what the tale of Genji is about, which is sort of a gift I wanted to give to readers. Because I think it's so cool that she wrote this novel. I think it's cool that we still have it, if you think about texts that have been lost throughout history. So my ambition was to be able to give that to the reader in, like, not a very long book, because that book is really long. And so that was definitely one of my secret ambitions that you now know about.
I love that. And I have to ask as a follow-up, you can say no. Do you want to talk about writing the sex?
People ask me that. I don't mind talking about writing the sex. What would you like to know?
I guess writing the body and writing this middle-aged woman's pleasure and her self-discovery. What was the work like for you when you were writing that?
I mean, I saw sex in my mind and I wrote it down. I had been thinking about writing about sex for a very long time because someone once told me that I couldn't do it, so I was really mad. One day I'm going to show you. And I had like a list in my head of, oh, that was the wrong way to write about sex. That was so bad. You know, all of this sort of lofty, faux poetic moments where you can tell that the author was so embarrassed to write about sex that they're like, I'll just put, you know, habeth and endeth and, you know, her softness, and I'll just write about sex that way. And then, you know, and then I would read this and think, I so know what you're doing. You're distancing. That's not real. That's not what happens. And then there's a lot of funny sex, right? Where people don't want to have to actually, the way to get around writing about sex is to be funny, haha, like it's like a joke, like American Pie, is that a movie, right? Is there sex in that movie, or something about Mary, or, you know, there's a funny way that we treat it. And I thought, no, I'm just, when I do it, I will write about it directly so that it's actually what happens, in my opinion. So I had done thinking about it, so then when it was time to perform, I was kind of ready to go. And the truth is that the sex parts of the book came fairly early. There were only so many scenes. Like I remember thinking, I need to do another sex scene, but man, I don't know what else there is to cover. You know, I could say, well, they had sex again, but I sort of thought, I think that's enough also. But all of that happened really in the initial draft and remained in the book. And I don't know, I was a dancer for a long time when I lived in New York, so you have to know your body if you dance. So maybe that's part of it too, that I was aware of what part of the body corresponds to what. I don't know, or I think about choreography all the time anyway. So that might have been, I mean, I could be making that up, but I think there's something to that when you're engaged in a discipline like that, where you have to know at such a minute level, you know, what your body's doing, it probably was part of it. But yeah, I knew what I didn't want it to be and what I thought mature sex should be, and I didn't want anyone to read it and think, oh, she was afraid, or oh, she's faking. And I didn't want anything violent either, because that's the other thing that you see portrayed. And you know, most of the time, hopefully, well, I don't know about most of the time, but it can be this intimate exchange. So then how would I write that? Well, with a sort of procedural quality, so it's detailed, but also something emotional comes through.
And, you know, kind of going outward from the body, the society of this book feels so expansive, and it feels like the fish in her backyard and the birds that she sees, all of it feels like part of the society that she belongs to. Can you talk about writing birds and fish and trees in this particular way?
The birds and the fish and the trees as part of a society? Well, that's her company. I mean, she's by herself in her childhood home, and she's fortunate enough to be surrounded by a lot of natural beauty. And so she's describing what she sees, and it's spring. The pandemic started in spring, and of course none of the animals had any idea that there was a pandemic. So they were responding to nature's call, as in the section that I read. And she's separated from her children and from her mother and from many of the demands of her life. And so day by day by day, she's watching what they're doing. And then she notices, oh, they're not doing the same thing every day. You know, there's suddenly a day where a bird goes by with something in its beak, and she realizes, oh, that bird is building a nest. So she's paying attention. And I guess one of the things that is said about the Tale of Genji, it's this Japanese classic, so it's beloved in Japan because it really portrays or gives to us these classical Japanese aesthetics, which are very derived from nature. I think there are 300 and some poems, I think, and many of them use the language of nature to express human emotion. So that's what they teach you in college, right? The warbler's song changes once it's spring because the warbler's calling its mate. The dew on the grass, you know, is very sad. It's like the dew is weeping, and, you know, it's like my tears because my lover has left me. I mean, they teach you all this stuff in college. So I had learned it, and then they paint it too. So you see it in painting. You see things repeated, and it's kind of one of the basic ingredients of Japanese aesthetics. So I knew that, and I did consciously think, I'm going to apply that to this narrator, who's going to be imbued with a certain way of seeing as a result of spending time with the tale of Kenji. And so that's what happens, which was also a little gift to the reader.
One of the most wrenching storylines in the book for me had to do with our main character communicating with her mother. And it felt like the mother was such a full character with a life of her own. Another intriguing character who is referenced, I won't give too much away. Can you talk about bringing this older woman into the book as her own full person?
This is a really interesting question and a sign of a really good reader. You asked earlier also about the body. So I think bringing in the mother character relates to the body, because the daughter has been the caretaker for the mother. So the daughter doesn't feel like her body is her own body. And anybody who has children or is a caretaker, you know what that's like. You're empathizing with the needs of a small child. Are they hurt? Are they sick? Are they hungry? Oh, I feel it, therefore they must be hungry. And then the protagonist is also empathizing with the mother who is ailing. So if you do a lot of that in life, you can feel like your own body isn't your own body. So to sort of complicate your earlier question about the body, I think the mother is sort of like the opposite pole to what is propelling our protagonist forward. I didn't have as much about the mother in the early drafts because I sort of thought, the mother's ill, the daughter has been caring for her, that's kind of enough. And my editor said that's not enough. We need to know more about the mother character. So when people ask what was hard about the book, they often think writing the sex was hard. And the sex was not hard, it was the mother character and these intense emotional descriptions of a person who is failing and the panic that you feel as a caretaker watching somebody fade. That was hard to write. And I remember having to do one more round of edits and getting, oh, this is so good, you got it, I just want you to do one more round. And I thought, no, I don't want to engage deeply with this part again. I'm going to cry, And it's still, I have early readers who read early drafts and then read this one, and they love the mother section. But I don't like to read it. And for me, it feels, I always say, are you sure it's not too much about the mother? And everybody always says, no, it's not. It's very interesting.
This is your return to fiction.
Yeah.
What is it like going back and forth between nonfiction and fiction? And does the process of editing feel very different for this novel?
They're both so hard, When you're writing nonfiction, you think, man, if I could just make this up. and then when you're writing fiction, you think, well, if I could just know what actually happened. It's just like there's no winning in this. There's no way to make it easy. I guess I feel like at the editing stage, I'm not sure I feel like they're so different because one is nonfiction and one is fiction. Because at the point that I'm editing and working closely with, I've been really lucky. I've had amazing editors. I had Fiona McRae edited my first novel, and then Elaine Mason edited my second, and these last two books were with Ethan Osowski. And they're all fantastic editors. And they're all, that's actually one of my favorite parts of writing, is working closely with an editor where I know there's going to be a book, so I don't have to panic about that. And we're just trying to make the story real and cut out anything false. And because they're all really good readers, what, to use a music analogy, what levels do we have to raise and what do we have to lower, or lighting, or any form of art where you're trying to bake in these contrasts. So I feel like that's always the same, but particular to the work. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what comes to mind for me. I think when I'm thinking of a subject, sometimes I'll think, is this better as nonfiction? Is this better as a novel? This just really, it was such a weird gift. Like the idea just came to me almost completely whole. And I knew it had to be a novel, and I never thought I would write fiction again. So I was really surprised. Like joke that it's my accidental pregnancy. Have a pandemic. I have an accidental pregnancy. It's a novel. Yeah.
Why did you feel you wouldn't write fiction again?
Because it's so hard, and nobody told me. And Mockett is such a brilliant writer. We can't wait for her next. Like the New York Times never said that, so I was like, oh fuck it, I'm not going to write it. I'll go through that again. Please buy my book. No, just write about nonfiction. Yeah, I mean that's actually really what I thought. Like, this is scary. I can't do this. So,
do you feel across your nonfiction and your fiction that there are obsessions that you're always circling?
Oh, probably. I'm always wondering what the truth is. It's one of the reasons I love working with Ethan is he can see how all of these works are connected. Not everybody does. I mean, I was told once, you're a Japan girl. Why are you writing about farmers? Because I'm a thinker. So yeah, I would like to know what the truth is. I'd like to know what the truth is, and I'd like to know how we all could possibly live together in the world, which I don't really think is like a very popular question. But I feel like it's actually kind of the most important question, because we don't have a future if we can't live together. So those are things that are always driving me. Two people who don't know how to talk to each other, how could they talk to each other? It's a really hard question. I mean, it's one thing for me to say I'm right, like to write a book from the point of view of I'm right. But that doesn't seem to be what I tend to do.
I'm going to sneak in one more question and then we'll open it up for audience questions. So get ready and think about what you would like to ask. And I would like to ask you, in what way do you feel you are a different writer now than the writer you were when you started?
Oh my gosh. I know that if I start writing, I will probably get to the end of what I'm writing. Which sounds really small, but it's, because you wonder, am I going to have anything at the end of it? And now I know, no matter how crappy the original draft is, I'm just working it out. I wrote a really terrible essay recently, and I sent it to a friend of mine. I said, this is really terrible. And he just said, just keep working at it. And then it turned into 3 separate essays, and I had sort of known at the time that I was combining a lot of thoughts at once. But I don't think I could have dealt with that sort of what seemed like chaos when I was younger. It would have been too scary. There you go, being chaotic again, I think that I am constantly thinking this. I think a really big change, Megha, honestly, is when I had a child and I couldn't rewrite. So the story that I tell is I would take him to the park and push him on the swing, and I would be, because he's safe because he's on the swing. And I would be thinking, okay, so if I start here, then I could go over here. I do that kind of drafting in my head more. The sort of abstraction, which is not something that I could do. I think that's a really big difference. I'm aware that time is going to run out, so I really have to think each project has to count, has to be asking something new, it has to matter. And so I think those are some of the ways in which I work differently. And I don't, and I used to read, and now the other thing is I'm a very selfish reader, because I was reading Goodnight Moon and things like that when I had a child. So then if I was going to do my own reading, I had to make sure that I was spending time on books that were feeding or answering or exploring questions that I had, and that I wasn't reading out of obligation, but out of something that I really needed to know. So I read a lot of nonfiction because I'm trying to understand what people are thinking.
That's a beautiful answer. Okay, questions. If you would like to raise your hand, I can just repeat the question.
We're all friends.
Yes.
It's so good to see you, Marie.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, and I'm curious if you were doing any meditating in this garden about what's happening to our shared space, not just during the pandemic, but how all these things that you're so carefully observing are in peril due to our activity. That really resonated with me just from the title and what I've been going through in my personal life. I was just curious if that was going on for you.
So you mean like, did I sit cross-legged with my hands outstretched meditating, or was I sort of meditating
Thinking.
like, oh yeah,
Thinking.
sure,
Yeah.
absolutely, that was on my mind.
Yeah.
And I subsequent to this book, I've tried to write some pieces. I wrote a piece for Orion on the Gion Festival, which takes place in Kyoto in Japan, and it's 1,200 years old, and it was a festival that was enacted 1,200 years ago to counteract a plague. And in the Tree Doctor, I talk about texts that were written after fires in Japan or after plagues. So this is something that people have been reflecting on. So in a way, I mean, one of my realizations during the pandemic pretty quickly was, oh, it's that thing that there are all these temples in Japan where if you go, this temple was built to counteract a plague. And I thought, oh, so this is that, here, now it's here. It's not a shock, it's part of history. So what are the ways that people have dealt with this in the past? So then what do I do to deal with it? Because, ancient people knew. Did they leave any wisdom for me? So some of that, absolutely, I've tried to put into the book. I try to say that I feel like the book is very life-affirming, but like not in a bullshit way. Because life can be really grim and hard, and sickness is very scary, the uncertainty of it. But we're not like the first people to go through that. So then what did people say in the past? So I was thinking about that. And then, yes, of course, thinking about harm to the environment and these birds that I remember we had a big fire in California, and I was waiting for the golden crown sparrows to come back from Alaska to California, but they couldn't get through because of the smoke, and I just felt so terrible for them, and the plants and the animals just keep trying to adapt to whatever the environment is throwing at them, which is what we're trying to do. So a lot of that thought is in here, yeah. Liz?
When did you realize that writing was what you wanted to do professionally, personally, with your life?
12, and then I was really stubborn. Yeah, I don't know that there are a lot of things that I can be that committed to, but I was really committed to this. I liked dancing, and then I realized I was reading a lot. Somebody said, your grandmother was a writer, and I thought, oh, that's like a thing you can become. People write these books, so I think I would like to do that. It was really hard.
You did it. I think there was a hand in front.
Robin.
So great to see
It's
you,
great
Marie.
to see you too.
And I love that this came yesterday. Let me try to be succinct in the question. When you started this project, was there a question or something that you didn't know that the writing process, finishing the book, enabled you to know?
I think that Megha's question about the body is really interesting. Like, what is a body? What is it? What do we do with it? What does it mean to be alive? I think we're probably what are the unseen forces that affect us and how we carry ourselves physically? I think those are some of the questions that I had. I personally had a very ill parent from the time I was 10. So I was always afraid of sickness. And I'm very vigilant. Like, my son has a fever, and I'm like, how high is the fever? How many days has it been? Like, I know all this stuff because, well, I'm a mother, but also because it's something that we would always talk about with other. So that dynamic, I wondered, how do you manage finding joy in life when you're afraid in that way? I was really trying to explore that question. I think, I love this cover. And the story with it's really funny. I found these images in my phone. I had apparently asked AI, what does it look like if a woman is embracing a tree? And they were terrible because AI didn't know the answer. They were really bad. And I saw this image and I thought, oh my gosh, it's my book. And so we were very fortunate that this artist allowed us to use her illustration. But I mean, I look at this and I think of this woman embracing some sort of disembodied life force and having a passionate embrace. That's what I see when I look at the cover. And so my question was, what is that? And then trying to explore it in as many ways as possible. How are you asserting being alive? In asserting being alive, how are you asserting your identity? I think it's really attempting to think that your identity is what you think. But some of us know that our identity is our bodies and how our bodies want to express themselves. So what is that? I mean, I don't think we know exactly. I don't know what human sexuality is ultimately, but I think it is an existential question. And so I think I got to explore that from many different angles. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
You are. I realize, it's not something like, I didn't know this, and here was my question, and I learned that. I knew it was going to be a conversation circling something, and
yeah, I mean, I didn't know as much about the tale of Genji as I do now. I didn't know as much about cherry trees as I do. I mean, so there's all that stuff.
Right.
But this is the deeper question. Like, what is the
exactly.
life force? Why is it a mystery?
Yeah.
Why is human sex powerful? Why do people try to legislate it? Because it's powerful. Why did religions try to get rid of it? Because it's powerful. Why did some religions worship it? Because it's powerful. And the Tale of Genji has a lot of that because it was written 1,000 years ago by somebody who didn't know anything about, the Judeo-Christian tradition, but knew a lot about this sort of animistic religion. And so that comes through for us. It's really interesting.
So when you talked about writing the sex, you mentioned wanting to do it in a way that wasn't violent specifically, and also in a way that didn't make light of it as to try to detach from it. But it sounded like the passage that you read with the birds had both of those things. It was brutal and funny. So I don't know if I have a question there, but I wanted to.
There was this whole part before where the goldfish, like 5 of them at the same time, were having sex, which I thought was kind of funny. But then that would have gone on too long. The whole passage, there's lots of birds and bees and things that are getting it on. I think the point of it is, it's springtime, and if you pay attention to all these animals are responding to nature's call, like, by which I don't mean, using the outhouse. And so will she. And that it is potentially messy. Because the hawks, that's their nature. They are killers, they are predators. If anybody likes birds and goes birding, like, you'll meet people who say, I don't look at raptors. I don't do raptors. I only do seed eaters, because they don't want to deal with this kind of thing. And then there are people who men love raptors. I just went to see sea eagles in Japan. It was all men. I love raptors, It's pretty funny. But I also think, Sean, there's like this inherent mystery. I don't know what's happening. It's powerful. And so I was trying to sort of, and I actually did watch hawks do this. And thought, wow, I didn't know that was going on in my backyard. It's kind of also amazing. Like, he kills the bird and gives it to her so she can eat, because she's going to have the babies and sit on the nest, and he's taking care of her. They're incredibly attentive to each other. Like, I've spied on them a lot. It's very interesting.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. I saw a hand here a while ago.
I was curious what you were reading besides the Tale of Genji while you were writing, whether it was as research or something that maybe influenced the book or as escape?
It's a great question. So I was reading a lot of research, and then I was reading, somebody help me, the woman who won the Nobel Prize, the French memoirist.
Annie Ernaux.
Thank you. I was reading Annie Ernaux before she was famous. I was reading Annie Ernaux. And I think that's it. So a lot about cherry trees and care and maintenance of your fruit trees in your garden. Annie Ernaux, and lots of, because there are a lot of new translations of the tale. So a lot about hay on pen. I was reading because I couldn't get away with pretending like what I knew what the book was about. I had to actually know something.
That's a lot of work.
Kept me occupied. Is there one
Last question. Yes, one more.
If no one has, is there another question?
There's one right behind you.
Okay,
No,
that's
you
fine.
can go, Mary. if you'd
No,
like.
no, it's fine. I don't really. Mine's maybe kind
Well,
of stupid.
maybe we can take both, and then you can answer.
I'll try to be quick. Okay.
Okay, we'll
So
take
mine's a sort of pandemic-y question because I live near Prospect Park, and one of the things that I read about and felt was that during the pandemic, the natural world came out more. Like I could go sit at a certain place in the park and see birds I'd never seen, and also it was quiet. People weren't, it was quieter. You could hear the birds. You could hear nature. Did that inform your experience at all when you were did you feel like there was more nature while you were working on this book at all, or was it?
Well, I think I gave myself over to it.
Okay.
I thought that's what I've got, so I'm going to give myself over to this totally.
Right.
And that's fine. Almost like please help me get through this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There was another
Okay.
question.
I think it's really popular right now for writers to want to translate consciousness onto the page.
Oh.
You see this kind of with autofiction. You see this with a lot of more abstract novels. So I find your preoccupation with the body really refreshing, and I'm wondering, in your opinion, which writers write the body well?
I have to think about it and get back to you. I don't know. I mean, I was writing something that I wanted to read. I'm not sure. It sounds terrible, but I'm not sure that I was thinking, oh, that person writes the body really well. I want to do that. I was trying to write something that I felt was missing. And so I have to think about that.
Thank you, Marie, for your very thoughtful responses. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
As promised, I brought the Shogun Bear with me. Some of you who are my Facebook friends know about him. He's very brave. Came all the way from Tokyo. So I had said, please come. I was trying to bribe you to come because I didn't think you would come otherwise. And can you put your name on a piece of paper, and then we'll put the pieces of paper in the hat. And there are two prizes. There's the bear. And there's it is Rirakuma. And there's the limited edition, Japan only, cherry blossom season thermos. But it's stainless steel. For cold and hot drinks. 2024 edition. They don't do that in America. So I thought that this was a really great prize, but then friends said, no, actually the bear is the prize. So I brought both. Oh, we did that one? Oh, awesome. Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah. There's even a hat.
You're potentially going home with a bear. Thank you so much for assisting me with this crazy plan I had. Thank you all for joining us. Oh no, I mean I love for you. Yeah, so you're gonna bring it in. Hi. Hi. So I keep half and I give him half.
Yes.